I think there's a percentage of people that aren't psychopaths, but when they get directed by or in contact with and effectively infected by these people, they begin to enjoy the same pleasures of psychopathy.
Welcome back to MindMatters, everyone. I'm Harrison Cayley. I've got Ilan Martin and Adam Daniels in the studio. Today, we are pleased to be joined by Michael Rectenwald. Michael is the author of several books. We've got, I think, all of his recent ones here. We got Thought Criminal, his most recent. We've got Beyond Woke. We've got Google Archipelago. And Ilan's got Springtime for Snowflakes. Right there.
Nice.
You're the author of several more books, Michael, but these are what you've been focused on in recent years. Maybe for viewers who aren't familiar with your story, just give a background on why are you writing these type of books now as opposed to the kind of academic stuff that you used to be writing.
Yeah, I mean, I was a scholar of 19th century British science and culture, and so. Previous to these books, I had a book called 19th Century British Secularism, Science, Religion, and Literature, and another book called Global Secularisms in a Post-Secular Age. I was a secular scholar of secularism as such, starting with its roots in 19th century Britain. But, then I had a fallout with the university and with the
New York
social justice.
Right?
Yeah, from New York University. Yeah. And I had a fallout with the social justice crew there. And, all I did, I tweeted like these ribald, bombastic tweets about social justice and stuff. And then I was asked to be interviewed by a student newspaper reporter. I did the interview, and then within 2 days, I was pressured into a leave of absence and condemned by a committee called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group. And thereafter, they just kept, basically trying to make my life impossible there. They went after me in a bunch of emails later after I came back from the leave, and I had been promoted to full professor in the interim. I don't think that made them happy. And they moved my office to the Russian department.
Yeah, exiled to Siberia.
Basically, I called it my own personal gulag because there was no books. They wouldn't move my books, and they were way across campus, and I couldn't do it. And they isolated me totally. So I sued the university and 5 colleagues who had used the university email listserv to totally smear me and stuff, calling me everything from a right-wing, alt-right, white supremacist, all the names, the same old stuff, except for one was short pants white devil. I still haven't looked into what that means, but short pants white devil. And I sued them, and I settled with them in 2019. Actually, this case was this is something I don't often say. The case was basically dismissed because my attorneys couldn't overcome their motion to dismiss, because they had an army of attorneys behind them. Mm-hmm. And so I invited Milo Yiannopoulos to speak in my classroom, and that caused this huge uproar. I got all these emails and all these threats from different student organizations saying that I was putting them in danger and all this stuff. And the mayor of New York, de Blasio at the time, actually called the university and canceled the class. And so I thought, well, this would be a good time I bet you that the administration will come back to the table after this, the negotiating table. And in fact, they did. Because who knows, I might have asked Richard Spencer next year. Because after all, the thing is, I wouldn't have, but I'm just saying that they couldn't be sure what I would do. I was within my academic freedom rights, so-called, and to have whoever I wanted lecture in my classroom as long as it's scholarly, which it was going to be. So they negotiated with me a settlement.
And
then I started writing,
okay.
During this time, I wrote Springtime for Snowflakes, which is about not only my the imbroglio at NYU, but also my academic history, like my own indoctrination into Marxism and postmodern theory and all that. And so I go into quite a bit of depth about my educational background in there, in graduate school in particular, starting with my MA at Case Western Reserve, and then my PhD at Carnegie Mellon, the English department at Carnegie Mellon, a bastion of socialism and Marxism and feminism and postmodern theory and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So it's really ironic and just absurd, the kinds of things that your university or colleagues were calling you, the kind of things they were calling you, when if you look at your history, I mean, it's probably hard to get any further left than you were for most of your academic career. Like, would that be fair? So
yeah, that's pretty fair. I was left of the Bolsheviks.
Yeah. So yeah. So it was.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was a left communist. So what that means is basically anti-statist communist, and against the Bolsheviks for their authoritarianism and all that. I never was for totalitarianism. I thought Marxism could be established, or Marxist ideas could be implemented without that. I wrote a lot of essays and published in, this was not my academic work. This was kind of an avocation. I wrote for, various Marxist journals and stuff, publishing all kind of stuff on political economy, transhumanism even, and other things from a Marxist perspective.
So that's your history, and like you said, it's told very well, very entertainingly, very clearly in your book, mm-hmm. Springtime for Snowflakes. It's a great read, and then in what was it, 2015, 2016? When did you start your Twitter account?
2016 in the fall.
So in 2016, was it that in 2016 you noticed something, or had it been kind of building to the point where you had to say something?
It was building a bit. I had witnessed some hiring practices in the university, and I recounted this in Beyond Woke. Just crazy things going on in terms of the social justice, or what now is called wokeness. The way they were running the university was obscene. And there was a few other run-ins, that I started having with the transgender ideological madness, and I couldn't contain myself anymore. Mm-hmm. I had a distinct thought one night, and actually I was staying at a hotel because I used to actually commute from Pittsburgh to New York and stay in a hotel. I stayed at the hell was that place again? I don't know. This hotel on the river on the Hudson. The Jane. I would stay at the Jane Hotel, and one night I had the distinct thought: if I voice what I'm thinking as a NYU professor, all hell will break loose. And I thought, and what do you know? I did it. So.
Well, but you did it, and I'd say that for all of the it's easy for me to say on the outside looking in, but for all the trouble you went through and all the hate and all the disruptions to your life, I mean, I think from the work that you've been putting out, not just in your books, but you write regularly. You're published on Mises.org, and you write great stuff. And I think without that experience, that you probably wouldn't have gone in this direction and kind of come to the conclusions that you've come to. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely not. I would have not come to these conclusions if I hadn't stepped out and said what I thought, and then gotten the backlash that I did, and then saw the character of the left for what it was, I never would have written these works. And I would have stayed as a kind of like hermetically sealed academic that I was, with like 3 readers of my books. I mean, let's be real about academia. It's now my books have been, my academic work has been cited a lot, but it's nothing like popular audiences. And what I mean here is a broader audience, and speaking as a public intellectual, public-facing intellectual instead of just an academic. It's got a lot of rewards to it. It's more rewarding in a lot of ways. I miss teaching, but that's about it. I don't miss the colleagues, the administration, or anything else about academia except for teaching. I can still do academic writing, but it's not worth it, because you only do academic writing to advance in academia generally.
That's one of the main takeaways, I think, from Springtime for Snowflakes. It's that, far from being this academia being this institution of free thought and intellectual development and curiosity, it's far more politicized and far more of a commodified job market in terms of professors marketing themselves as this niche cultural studies figure and this this ideologue in a particular sector of liberal left-wing writing, among other fields. And you really bring that home in your book as well, Michael. It's like it really strips away the illusions we have about how universities and higher forms of education supposedly in the U.S. are actually run.
Yeah. First of all, there's a lot of narrow banding ideologically. It's very, very restrictive. And so I've seen people thrown out. For example, in my PhD program, I saw people thrown out of the program for being other than leftist. I've seen people dismissed for and not hired in the first place. I've been on hiring committees where anybody that was the slightest bit conservative would be totally overlooked. They wouldn't even be considered at all. Any indication of that would be plenty to dismiss somebody. And all you're looking for when you're doing these hiring, you're only looking for ways to get rid of people. And being a white male would be one. I got lucky and got in before it became almost impossible for white males to get hired. And now you have to put up these diversity, equity, and inclusion statements in order to get jobs. And you have to swear fealty to this agenda on the job. So, and who knows what else is going on at NYU? I've heard the department I was teaching in has been totally ruined by social justice or wokeness. And now everything is politicized. Every statement you make, you have to put these oaths basically on your syllabi, and it's just terrible. And yeah, there's a lot of marketing going on. It's very narrow band niche marketing. And a lot of, I would say it's really akin to advertising in the sense that you're just making these kind of, what they do is basically plug and play phraseology. You have to have the right phrases, citing Paulo Freire or whatever. Idiot statements, basically, that anybody could put together. Probably an algorithm could do most of these job applications just as well as people.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy. It is crazy. I mean, well, I've heard stories about people actually, in these situations, either getting positions in universities or even probably other jobs where they're essentially trainers, I think, that help you, say, oh, these are the things you have to say. This is the way to say it. Yeah. And so a lot of people just treat it as, there's no conviction behind it. It's just, these are the statements that I have to make. So you put it on there because you're not going to get hired otherwise. And
Right.
it's just a statement of belief. Yeah. It's just show that you'll comply, that you'll pretend to agree with all these things that even if it's, you don't think about it at all. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, for sure. But I'm getting nauseous. So can we change the subject?
Yeah. Well, let's go into something that might be more nausea-inducing, but totalitarianism. So when in a lot of your tweets and in your books, you talk about totalitarianism and how you see social justice and the ideology, like the collective ideology of social justice, as like a new totalitarianism, and the way it's being implemented as a new totalitarianism. So was that also something that you started seeing right away, and did that develop? And like, I know a bit of your backstory on how that kind of extended your reading. So you discovered new writers that had been off limits beforehand in your career, like the libertarian thinkers like Rothbard and Mises and like von Hayek probably. So tell us a little bit about that, about your intellectual journey in regards to the totalitarian aspect of what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, I noticed the totalitarian character of the left suddenly. And I also noticed that I had been basically an authoritarian in some senses, and that I had to, and I totally just completely shed that whole ethos, and seeing it just demonstrated so blatantly against me, and made me think, I don't want anything to do with this ever again. And I renounced the whole left all at once. I put up a tweet at one point where I voiced my total renunciation of the left for all time. And then I started, I was doing a lot of reading in the history of communism and various areas. Like I mentioned in the foreword that I wrote for your book, I did a lot of digging in the Stalinist digital archive. And I was trying to get to the bottom of some of the just the way that totalitarianism operates and how it is justified. And, I started to see the whole left as effectively, all the utopianism really was just a totalitarianism in waiting. I saw totalitarianism as endemic to leftism in general. And so I did a lot of reading in the Black Book of Communism and a lot of historical work. And then that was the political transformation. I became a civil libertarian through that. And then I started reading in the Austrian School of Economics, and that accomplished my conversion to the economic libertarianism. In effect, I came to believe that property rights are the real basis of actual individual rights. The first property being property in oneself, and that when you have property in oneself, first of all, you can have property in yourself as in communism. You're immediately a slave because you have no rights of your own over your own body and what you do. And then I started to see the same ideology operating that was operating in the university everywhere, and it really was metastasizing. It's not in my imagination. It's not like I was projecting this onto other realms, but I saw it in the digital sphere and in business, in corporate policies and corporate America, and then it's basically metastasized to the entire body politic now. So I started studying, then I started writing about this Great Reset, and in connection with the kind of reading I was doing in terms of the Austrian school and the research into leftist criminality.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned all that, because one thing that strikes me about your books and the essays and articles that you've been publishing on Mises and other places is the broad spectrum of ways in which totalitarianism has been made manifest, particularly in the West. So here are just a few of the titles of your articles, Michael, for our listeners, just so that people get a sense of how many different ways you've been looking at this, and in depth. So there's Vengeance and Sacrifice, Whiteness as Scapegoat in Critical Race Theory and Critical Whiteness Studies. Another one, Woke Capitalism is a Monopoly Game. Another one, Social Justice and the Emergence of COVID Tyranny. Here's another one, Why Postmodernism is Incompatible with the Politics of Liberty. Another one, The U.S. lacks a principled immigration policy. So you also get into domestic politics. Dems are exploiting that under the guise of, quote, humanitarianism, end quote. Here's another one. Who funds the riotous American left and why? The globalist billionaire class, which uses it to build corporate socialism. And here are a couple more. 79% of Americans think that the U.S. is falling apart. That's no surprise when half of the country wants to crush the other. And here's one last one. Backing Biden, leftist resistance to Trump perpetuates illegal U.S. invasions, wars, neocon victories. So to me, it seems like you saw the template of totalitarianism and its essence. And then kind of like, the guy from They Live, you had the sunglasses on and you were able to see, how this existed under the surface of so many different areas. And it's almost an explosion of insight as far as I can tell, which I am, glad for. And I'll just add one more thing. Thank you. I'll just add one more thing. There are very few writers and people speaking out and writing right now who are able to, I think, look at so many different political, social, psychological, economic fields and look at it and see exactly how it's gone horribly wrong and be right. I don't think I've read anything of yours so far that I've thought, oh, he's right there, but there, he obviously hasn't read this or this other thing. And, you're good, man. It's
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm flattered. And I'm a little bit shy about things like this, but I really appreciate it.
Well, one last thing I wanted to mention, and that is that you have an excellent multi-part series on the Great Reset on the Mises website. And that, of course, is like the overlap between this, ultra elite agenda and all of this kind of from the ground social justice. There's a huge intersection, pardon the term.
Very much so. Intersection. I get you. Intersectionality.
Intersectional totalitarianism.
Exactly. But you make the connection.
Good title.
Quite well. And because most individuals, well, you do. Most people, they see one dimension of it or the other really well if they've been researching it. And you're saying, no, look at how one serves the other or how one is being made to serve the other. And I just think that that's also very important for people to understand that it's totalitarianism from above and below, effectively.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's like there's something in common that socialists have in common with these corporate elite status, and that is they both want total intervention and control. And they're actually serving each other perfectly right now. So the left is totally at the command and in the pocket of and working at the behest of, whether they know it or not, of corporate state elitists and even to this day now, of course, the military industrial complex and the alpha beta agencies and basically the whole establishment, the left is now a total pro-establishment contingent, which is just amazing. But if you think about it, it makes sense, because once socialist ideas become dominant, then of course the socialists are going to support what's dominant because that's what they want. So there's socialism, but it's corporate socialism, as I've said in those essays. And what I mean by that is that it's a corporate run socialism that is being established. It's run and operated by these corporate elite oligarchs. And they're promising kind of socialism on the ground as compensation for their effective monopolization of the entire international world economy. They are instituting, or they're using especially socialist-like rhetoric, like equity, fairness, and inclusion and all that. When they mean equity, they mean equal outcomes, and fairness means the same. Basically, it's socialism for thee and corporate monopolistic capitalism for me. That's really what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that I can't remember which book it was in, maybe multiple ones, but you quote and reference Anthony C. Sutton's work on Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. We interviewed an author, a researcher, Richard B. Spence, who wrote a book like 5 years ago. Yeah, Wall Street and the Russian Revolution. Have you read that one?
Yes, he's great.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that struck me, I haven't read Sutton yet, but I read Spence's book, and one of the things that struck me out of that is that he points out all of the rich capitalists, corporatists in the early 1900s who were also socialists, and it's one of the things that I think that you point out briefly, and that Sutton and Spence points out, is that there is no contradiction between between the two. It's like it seems odd at first because you think, oh, there's no way that this monopolist capitalist can be a socialist, but you find out, oh, they actually are, and it makes sense, like the way you put it in a modern context with reference to previous examples like Gillette. It makes sense as you describe it, because, well, when socialism is established, like what happens? Well, it creates a giant monopoly. The state is the monopoly, and with control of the economy, control of the major like industries and corporations. Well, so of course, if a rich capitalist is looking at that, he's going to think, well, that would be great if I was the state, right?
Exactly.
It's not so great if someone else appropriates his business, his corporation, and then incorporates it into the state. But if he can get in on the ground level, then it's gravy. It's great.
Right. Sutton talks about this. Like, I just pulled up a quote. That's why I was looking to my side here. He says, consequently, this is in the book, what's it called? The Wall Street and the Russian Revolution. Consequently, one barrier to mature understanding of recent history is the notion that all capitalists are the bitter and unanswering and unswerving enemies of Marxists and all socialists. This erroneous idea originated with Karl Marx and was undoubtedly useful to his purpose. In fact, the idea is nonsense. There has been a continuing, albeit concealed, alliance between international political capitalists and international revolutionary socialists to their mutual benefit. This alliance has gone unobserved, largely because historians, with a few notable exceptions, have an unconscious Marxian bias and are thus locked into the impossibility of any such alliance existing. So there's this, this ideological box that's been created that makes it impossible for people to see these kinds of things because they think in these terms that they've been dictated to by Marx, in effect. You have capitalists and capitalist interests here, and you have the proletarians over here. They're they're locked in this dialectical struggle, and there's nowhere that the two will ever meet. In fact, this is a battle to the end, in effect, to the death in some cases, and it can't be overcome except by, the overcoming of capitalism. So there's this total opposition, but this is not true. And then corollary to that is that, only right-wing ideology supports capitalism, that left-wing ideology never supports capitalism. That's also not true. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that leftist ideology has done a great deal to support monopoly capitalism.
Well, Elon mentioned your Great Reset series. Well, I want to get to that. First, I want to talk about some of your recent writings. You mentioned, just in passing, this book. I've got a proof for it. This is the new edition of Political Ponerology. You see right there on the bottom, forward by Michael Rectenwald. So you've written the forward of this book. I edited it. So a bit of a collaboration there.
Is it any different than what I wrote?
No.
I'd like to see what that says.
No. I misspoke, or you're just making a joke. I edited the book. Yes.
Wonderful job you did, by the way. I didn't mention that in the forward because it would be because basically what I would say is, with all the footnotes and the incredible scholarship that went into that, you've really updated that book and made it totally relevant.
Great.
So that's what I want to say now. If I failed to say it in the forward, there's a great deal to be gained by getting this edition.
Great. And so you can see here, this says not for resale. This is just the proof. But by the time we put this up, it should be available. So everyone should check it out. Michael wrote a great forward for it. Makes me want to read it again. And we can talk about maybe we can talk about a bit about the book later and why you wrote the forward and why you thought it was important enough to do so. But maybe briefly, maybe not. Before that, I want to talk a little bit about the Great Reset. I noticed on Facebook that you've got perhaps the final title for your projected new book.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah,
can you talk a little bit about that?
It's going to be the Great Reset: How Capitalists Became Marxist. And I was thinking of adding how some Marxists have become capitalists, but I'm not sure about that yet. And I'm not sure about the title. What I want to do in that book is situate the Great Reset in historical context, going all the way back to the early communist millennialists in the 16th and 17th centuries, and connecting it all the way forward through Rousseauian socialists, through Saint-Simonian socialism, into Marxism, and then, through the Fabian socialists, and all the way into the World Economic Forum, and then letting people see the historical similarities between what this group is up to and what's been floated before. There's some real serious connections, especially with Saint-Simon. The Saint-Simonian socialists basically came to the same exact ruling class as the main. They came to posit the same kind of ruling class, if you will, that the WEF has promoted. That is a technocratic elite, banked, basically supported by big central banks and major corporate technological corporations, which would allow for the technocracy element of technocratic control. Mm-hmm. So, what I don't want to do in that book is just write like another book like Glenn Beck's book called The Great Reset. And that is to say, first of all, the very notion has still gotten this it still has this kind of like resonance of conspiracy theory even though I think now people realize that this is not a theory, this is probably an avowed open plan, and it's being implemented in various ways through different programs and policies, like the Build Back Better policies of the Biden administration, and so on and so forth. And there's so many manifestations of it, it's almost impossible to get a handle on all of them. But I want to make it clear, like this, what kind of a system this is that they have in mind. I want to do that through some historical exegesis and positioning and situating. So that's why I'm going to do this kind of historical excursus and see how, in fact, this thing lines up with other projects of a similar nature. Why, in fact, they're socialists. I mean, why their socialism is compatible with this model. And I think we touched on that already with the idea that socialism is nothing if not a monopoly. But these corporate state partners, or as they call them, public-private partnerships, see themselves, these people that are instituting that, from Schwab through all of his global leaders and so on, they see themselves as this kind of administrator class that will oversee the institution of this on-the-ground socialism, which to them is not incompatible with this oligarchy that they essentially support.
Mm-hmm. That relates. I'll get into a little bit of Ponerology here.
Elon's looking bored all of a sudden. I don't
know. No. I was thinking of Ponerology as well. No, go ahead with your question, Harrison, and then I might follow up with something. But I know Adam has something too he wants to mention.
It'll be a kind of just a comment / interpretation that maybe you can give your thoughts on. So it was just a few days ago that I came across some clips of, what's the guy's name? Harari. He's one of the, Schwab's acolytes.
Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, Yuval Noah Harari. And it was the clip that's going around has been going around recently, past week or so, of him talking about how, we've now achieved, through technology, like the mind is now a hackable thing. Humans are hackable, and we realize that we have no soul and no free will. So basically we're going to be hacking people and getting them. Now we can control people, well, I'm paraphrasing now. This is essentially what he's saying. And so I saw that, and the first thing that came to mind is, typical schizoid. Now, that word might be meaningless to a lot of people, or, bring up visions of 1970s King Crimson. But one of the things that Lobachevsky talks about in Ponerology is basically these different personality disorders and how they contribute to the origins of totalitarianism. And the thing he says about ideologies, especially the types of ideologies that become the backbone of a totalitarian system like Marxism, is that they tend to be created by individuals either with schizoid personality disorder or who are, pretty much like on that spectrum. And the key feature of that relates to this ideology is this. In Ian McGilchrist's terms, it's this left brain view of the world that is hyper rational, totally abstract, and at the same time totally divorced from reality. So these ideological or these ideologues, these people that come up with these grand ideological visions of how to fix the world, the problems with the world, and how to fix it. Oh, well, we just need to be rational. We just need to understand that humans are hackable creatures, and that the human mind is essentially a phantom, and that we can control people, and the world will be a great place once we do that. And so I really think that guys like Harari actually believe their own bullshit. I don't think that I don't know enough to say for sure, but I don't think a lot of these people are like consciously evil villains, like in the James Bond sense. I think they really think that they have the solution to fix the world. It's just that they don't they can't see the context, and they don't care about the fact that they could be wrong, and they don't care about the fact that even if they're right, they're going to destroy a whole bunch of they're going to be the cause of massive destruction in the process. And of course, they're wrong, so they don't actually realize that it's a pipe dream. So we've got guys like Harari who have this technocratic, arrogant, self-serving vision of the world, of other people, and how conveniently they're the ones who are going to be in charge, right? Because they're the smart ones, they're the rational ones, they're the ones that know exactly how to fix everything. We'll just implement this great reset, and then things will be better. The world will be better. We will build back better. But in the process, and this is one of the points that Lobachevsky makes, is that even if they have the greatest intentions, things don't actually go their way. Or they don't go the way that the vision implies that it should go or that it will go. Like if you look at the Marxist vision, and if you look at Marxists, what they want and what they will say they want never actually takes place. Some of them will, because some of them do want totalitarianism and total misery and disaster. But a lot of the people are just well-meaning and naive that they think, oh, here's the solution to the problems, we'll implement it. But it doesn't work because the theory was wrong in the first place. And it had several, it had not only fatal weaknesses baked into the theory, to the ideology, but also openings to then be exploited by people who really don't care about the solution. They just care about what they can get through the attempt to implement that solution. I just wanted to throw out there and see what you thought.
Well, did Adam have something to add first? Because I was...
Well, you can go ahead and give your comments on it, because it actually relates to what I was thinking about, which is kind of your ability to pull all of these different threads together in terms of seeing the totalitarianism and all of its various manifestations. And also, I think you clued into the fact that there was a personality aspect to some of this,
aspect,
personality pathological aspect to the reason why it seems to be so widespread in so many various ways and aspects. And I was personally curious about the development of your understanding coming to this realization, and where Ponerology fit into that kind of context for you. So I guess you can.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I'll try to field both of them. The thing that struck me about Ponerology in the book, Lobachevsky's book, is that there's the schizoid that's basically the theorist, like Marx. Marx was a schizoid, and then that theory gets exploited by psychopaths, and then they don't care. They're not actually, when they use the terms that they do, they're actually thinking of something else, and that the ideology is two-sided, or it's doubled. Mm-hmm. There's the tacit meaning of the ideology, and then there's this hidden implicit meaning that these psychopaths give to it, which makes them completely, basically inure to what the reading of this ideology is by the majority, the normal people, as Lobachevsky would put it. And that double-sidedness is intriguing to me, and I've been thinking quite a bit about that. But back to this Harari guy, I thought that he's kind of like a controlled opposition within the WEF, that he is supposedly voicing kind of concerns that the WEF is dangerous, and that what they want to do is dangerous, is very dangerous. And I took that video to be a kind of alarmism, but a kind of controlled opposition alarmism. But I may be wrong. I have to go back and look at it again. I don't think he's lauding these developments. I think that he's kind of warning against them. I thought it was largely an admonition. But if so, why is he so connected to the WEF? And why are they, on the one hand, touting all this, and then on the other hand, having this guy as a sort of like I guess he's kind of like a fuse, a kind of what do you call it?
Ignition,
sort of a valve for letting off
a release
pressure.
valve. Yeah.
Release valve. Yeah.
Yes.
Why are they, why are they floating this guy out there? So I have to take a look at that video again.
Yeah, well, and I've got to admit, it was a clip. I didn't see the full context from the clip that I saw. It looked like he wasn't really expressing in the clip, that he wasn't really expressing either way, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. It just this is the way it is, and it seemed like it was almost like, it seemed to me leaning in the positive direction, like, oh well, this is just the way things are.
It's a fait accompli.
Yeah.
And therefore, just accept it and go, see what happens. Yeah, that's kind of like Schwab's attitude towards the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Is it's a fait accompli. The only thing now, we need someone to manage it. I got to do this imitation. Every country, from the United States to China, must participate, and every industry, from oil, gas, and tech, must be transformed.
You need to get your Darth Sidious hood up as you do it.
Oh God, yes, he is a Bond villain. We can say that for him.
But I want to talk about that idea that I thought was kind of divergent from anything I'd read before. That you have these people that are basically floating the original ideology. And then you have the psychopaths that when they say X, they mean something entirely different. And they know the insider knowledge. They have the knowledge of the insider as to what this actually signifies in reality. And they don't care. In fact, they know, and in fact, that's what they're trying to implement. And they use this other language to facilitate it. So when they say the working class will be, we'll have a society run and operated by the working class, they mean a society run and operated by them as the party leaders and the state leaders, and that they will institute a totalitarian regime where people thought was going to be a worker's paradise. And that's just the way it is. And they know better than what, they know very much what they're doing. And I started to think that Schwab might be one of these people, that he's a psychopath and that he knows very well what he's saying means, but he uses the code words that they have, sustainability, equity, sharing, fairer, juster. What else does he say? We'll have shared goals. But these will be their goals that you will share. I mean, and the recent book, which I haven't gotten too far into, is The Great Narrative, in which basically there's a kind of tacit acknowledgement that this Great Reset discourse is not going over very well, and though they need to narrativize it better. And that is almost a sure sign of what Lobachevsky was talking about, where, what we're saying has been decoded. So we got to re-encode it to make sure it's oblique to the non-insider.
Mm-hmm. How many times have they done various different campaigns and pictures and things where they've put out what is explicitly their agenda, only for it to get trolled on Twitter and for people to be like, "What is this?
And
this is
you'll own nothing and be happy."
Yeah, you'll own nothing and be happy.
And then they deny it and say,
then
we didn't actually say that.
Yeah, that's the other thing. They gaslight us to death, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they put out this Great Reset all over their website in several books, COVID-19, the Great Reset. And then they sort of somehow get it across to the press that they're to dismiss it as a conspiracy theory. And it's still being dismissed that way by the mainstream media.
That's crazy.
Like the New York Times and the Anti-Defamation League, who's trying to impute that any kind of thinking with reference to this is grand, Jewish, anti-Jewish conspiracy theory. I don't see, Schwab. If anything, I would more liken him to a Nazi, frankly. To be honest, I mean, his parents were involved. I mean, his father was involved with the Nazi Party. I don't want to give a genetic fallacy here, but there is some connection to that. And there's so many bizarre elements to this that I have to unravel. Still, I think I've unraveled some of them, but there's still more to do. There's plenty more to do.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, as you were saying with and bringing up, what you were talking about, Harrison, with the way in which there's the schizoid personality types who are the theoreticians, the people who come up with the narratives, who basically aren't total psychopaths. They have to have some ability to interact with the real world in order to get to use the emotional hooks in the same way that a con man would do for stealing, or from from stealing from somebody. In order to con them, you have to hoodwink them. And they're able to come up with this grand and very simple, very simplified solution to things, which for anybody who's able to think at all to any great depth should come to realize that it's like it's a postmodernist critique, a rejection of meta-narratives. I mean, that in its essence is kind of like what you should do to any kind of meta-narrative, because meta-narratives in that kind of simple context are unusable and unworkable because they're not real understandings or real concepts based in the real world. It's a caricature.
I like that about Ponerology too, where Lobachevsky says that these people have impoverished views of the social order. Marx had an impoverished view of human beings. He basically was a terrible cynic where human nature is concerned. And this is what enabled him to pit these wicked, evil capitalists who when they hire people for a job, they're actually thinking, how can I keep from giving him X amount of the surplus value? How can I extract the surplus value from the point of production? And there's this, he even says this in Capital, there's this nefarious, first of all, it's an agreement across all these people within the capitalist class. They're all thinking like this because they have this particular class consciousness, so there's this reductionism of everybody into this very sinister mode of thinking, as if they all secretly think this way. And they're, coincidentally, every one of them thinks the same way. And that they all have this class interest in doing this to people. It's a very, I think Lobachevsky puts it great. It's such an impoverished worldview. And that's really what precipitates their theory. Before I read Ponerology, I thought that basically everything could be accounted for in terms of systemic critique, which is a very leftist way of thinking, frankly. And that, all you have to do is understand the system that they're putting in place, and then you can figure out how to demolish it. You can criticize it, and you can show where it's wrong. But it opened my eyes to the idea that there's this possibility that you have pathological worldviews being perpetrated by individuals, and then they're absorbed by the populace, and they are not strictly like systemic in that sense that they're just about the, like the worldview that they have really does derive from other individuals, and then it metastasizes out to the social body. And it's not enough to grasp what's wrong with it economically, what's wrong with it ideologically, what's wrong with it in all those other ways, politically, in terms of liberty and all that. In order to stop it, you have to realize what you're dealing with is very sick people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was totally new to me. I mean, yeah.
The way that you have what was it? I think it was in your introduction to Ponerology, where it's you have, so like you were describing with different people, that's kind of where the crux of the matter comes down to. Like you're saying, you thought you could critique the system. You thought you could look at the rules, look at the way that they laid things out. We're all rational human beings here. We can, come to an understanding of the critique, and then we can work forward from that. And therein lies the issue, is the assumption, the underlying assumption that everyone that you're dealing with
is the same,
is a normal person.
Yeah.
Is essentially the same.
Is a normal, rational human being with goodwill towards others.
Yes.
With perfectly, benign intent and all that. When this, I think he really convinced me that it's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to comment a bit on that, in that direction. So one of the things I mentioned in the introduction, well, before that, I want to give you an image. It's like the Predator, like in the movie, the Schwarzenegger movie, the Predator, like with the camouflage, you can just kind of see that he's there, or it might be something that's like that's kind of in your peripheral vision when you try to look at it, it still moves to your peripheral vision. It's always on the outer edge, and it never quite comes into focus. And that's the way I see the understanding of individual psychology in the relation to understanding all of these topics. It's the essential issue that is camouflaged, and that it's almost like there's a gravity well, or like a like light kind of curving around a planet, that it when you try to look at it, you just can't get it. It just escapes your notice. And in the introduction, as an example of this, I wrote about, with reference to Milgram and Zimbardo, and Milgram and Zimbardo were the two main ones. And so Milgram's experiment, the famous shocking experiment, where the experimenter sets up this fake interaction where one participant is giving a memory test, or a spelling test or something, to another participant, and when they get the answer wrong, you're supposed to shock them, and they turn up the dial until it is a deadly level of electricity, and presumably you hear the person screaming. Then eventually they stop screaming, and they're just lying on the floor if you can see them, and presumably you've now killed a person. And all because the tester, the experimenter, says, no, you have to keep going. No, you have to keep going. No, you have to keep going. And so similar in the Zimbardo prison experiment, you have these kids that, not necessarily kids, but young men who basically turn into sadistic prison guards. And you look at these experiments, and the way they're presented, the way I learned about them in psychology class, and the way they're presented in just general culture, it's all about how normal people can do bad things. And so, because a lot of these guys, these experimenters, were trying to understand real evils, like in World War II, like the Holocaust. How could ordinary people do evil things? But staring them right in the face is the fact that it's the experimenter telling them to do that. what role is the experimenter playing in that situation? That it's the thing that no one focuses on. Well, so in real life, in these real situations that they're trying to experimentalize, there's a real person giving the orders, right? Now, in real life, it's not a professor, a psychology professor, pretending to be an asshole, telling people to kill other people with electric shocks. Because if they were, it would be an experiment. And they say, oh, no, it wasn't real. That's the very reason the experiment was fake in the first place, is because they're not going to get these people to actually kill other people in the experiment. The fact is, like in Nazi Germany, it was real people killing other people in experiments, partly, in addition to many other things. So who is the person giving the orders? What is the type of person that actually does that? And that's the thing that's been almost completely ignored. Of course, there have been a couple people here and there who have made the connection, who have said it, like Gustav Gilbert, who was one of the prison psychologists at Nuremberg, who said Goering was a psychopath. We have to acknowledge this, that the Nazis had a psychopathy problem. We should take that into account. But it doesn't get any traction, and no one really looks at it. No one says, well, what role was Zimbardo playing? What role was Milgram playing? Well, he was playing the role of, well, what was it? It turns out, so Lobachevsky, who's lived through it, says, well, these people were the psychopaths. There was something, I saw a really interesting clip. But
these psychopaths, let me say this, these psychopaths will tell you that doing this evil to these people is actually good for them.
Right. And a lot of people will believe it.
Yeah.
That's another great point that he makes, is in the section on what he calls reversive blockades, which is essentially a big lie. Right. He points out just the basic psychology of it. When you tell a person a whopper of a lie, there's a psychological process where it makes it harder for them to actually see the truth. Mm-hmm. And you can see this all the time in the media. That's why fake news is a meme. Well, and a lot of people can see it, but I think a lot of that is probably just a result of what side of the political spectrum they happen to be on at the moment. But when you tell people a huge lie, just the fact of saying it, because I think there's this inherent trust within humanity as a social species where, for thousands of years, we've gotten by on believing what people tell us in just everyday conversation. It's like, I'm making dinner over there. We're going to eat in a few hours. Okay, and then a few hours later, you eat because that person was telling the truth. There are limits to the amount of deception and lies that people generally engage in ordinary interactions. So when a person tells you something, when a figure of authority tells you something with absolute certitude, this is true, or even just in an authoritative state of tone of voice that, we believe this to be true to a high degree of certainty or probability, and people will be like, they must have good reason for believing that, and without knowing that there is probably absolutely no evidence for what they're saying. They're just saying that in order to get you to believe it.
Right.
What I was going to say, this clip that I watched was from retired Lieutenant Colonel David Redman, who was the head of emergency management in Alberta for a while, and he's been, like, for a year and a half over the last year, a couple of years, he was really criticizing like lockdown policies and presenting alternatives, but kind of getting nowhere in Canada. And in this clip, he says that in his 27 years of military experience, there's one thing that he learned, is that no matter what what number of like recruits or just troops you're dealing with, whether it's 50, whether it's 100, whether it's 1,000, because he's dealt with like battalions, however big battalions are. I'm not a big military guy, like, and groups from like 50 to like 1,000 people or 800. He says in every group, he said, there's 5% of them are evil. He said in his military experience, he said in a group of 50, there would always be 2 or 3 people who were pure evil. And he said, if those people weren't removed, if they weren't identified and taken out, they would then influence the suggestible 15%, and the battalion or whatever grouping would be totally demoralized. Everyone else, the normal 80%, would do their jobs, but with their heads down. They would not be enjoying themselves. They would not feel like they're in a workable or just a working functional social unit. And but that as soon as those 5%, whether it's 2 or 3 or more, were removed, that 15% would instantly switch to the 80% and everything would go fine. And he says that was like one thing that he learned in 27 years of military experience. And then he made the connection, the leap, he says, and I think that we have to keep that in mind for every other level of society, of government, of, and any grouping of people, no matter where it is. It's not just the criminal class, the underclass, that anywhere you look, you're going to get, well, more or less, because there's going to be variations, but more or less, you're going to get 5% of people who are pure evil. And if they get into power, this is what Lobachevsky says, if they're the ones that get into power, then that 5% everywhere are the new ruling class. And then you've got that 15% of supporters, and everyone else is just putting their heads down, getting by. And that's the history of totalitarianism in the 20th century.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of like what's going on today, where you have people like Jen Psaki, the press secretary for Biden, is able to say, going back to reversive blockades, is able to iterate these most outrageous claims like inflation is not happening, or if it is, it's actually good for us, or it's a luxury problem, or anything. But these are so far removed from the truth. And yet, how does she get away with it with herself? That's the question that I really have. It's not how she's able to fool anybody, but how does she fool herself to this extent? Mm-hmm. And she's either one of these suggestible 15%, or else she's a psychopath. One of the two. This is a big question. How do these people do this? And I think one of the ways to understand it is through Ponerology. It makes perfect sense that way.
Mm-hmm. There's another aspect there, and that is the mentality that has been around. I don't know how many years, because I'm fairly young, but I don't know when I first noticed it. But this whole PR mentality, the idea in corporations, in politics, where you're presented with a PR disaster or something. And so you have to get in front of that. You have to put forward your narrative in order to protect your ass, essentially, and the asses of the people around you. So there's been just that culture. There's an incentive to lie, essentially, and so I think a lot of it, I might be too generous a lot of the time, but I think a lot of the times it is that kind of 15% phenomenon of people just going along with it. And it could even be in their mind, they might have good motive. Well, not necessarily good motives, but ordinary selfish motives. Because I think there's a good percentage of people that actually, like 15%. I think there's a percentage of people that aren't psychopaths, but when they get directed by or in contact with and effectively infected by these people, they begin to enjoy the same pleasures of psychopathy, and it gets to be fun for them. They're like, well, fuck those people, they sort of just go on with it, and they enjoy it. I think they enjoy the infliction of pain. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the important points that Lobachevsky raises. He calls it psychological induction. That induction. When you're in the sphere of influence of a person with a genuine psychopathology, that there's almost this resonance, and you can see this. It's probably most prominent in close relationships, like the child-parent relationship. When if you're raised in this environment with this distorted, altered, impoverished worldview and way of being, then it forms your mind in that way. And you grow up not knowing what the outside world is like, not knowing that there's an alternative, and so it's almost like this hypnotic effect. So I think that when you're potentially a wide-eyed, idealistic young person that wants to get a White House internship, and then you finally get in there and you see what the culture is, then there are so many incentives to just go along with the program and to have your mind shaped and to shape your own mind to actually be partly involved in the process in order to keep being part of the team. And unfortunately, what that means is that even if you were an idealistic, person who wouldn't ordinarily become a monster like that, that the fact that there are so many people doing it makes it a lot easier for a real wolf to be wearing that, so-called sheep's clothing, because they're all doing the same thing.
Yeah. And like you said, there's incentives. And one of those incentives, I think, is just pure pleasure. When they get into the act of lying, for example, it becomes a challenge to see just how much you can pull over and what kind of narratives you can make up to construct these reversive blockades. I think that's what the PR guy does. I faced that at NYU with the public relations guy. Every time something would happen with me, he would completely refabricate it. And he would just, take, very damning facts about NYU and flip them into this whole other register so that they were made to appear very acceptable and actually beneficial. And I noticed that the whole left went along. That was the other thing that I noticed is like these people that are supposedly, against power and, in Foucauldian terms, or against the ruling class in Marxist terms, really, when it came down to it, they sided with the behemoth over me. And that I found to be very curious.
There's almost a need or a desire to accept the lie. I don't know how to frame it, but it's almost a relief to have the lie presented as a life jacket, as a support. And again, in Ponerology, he calls this like conversive thought processes or substitution and selection of data, is that when there's an uncomfortable truth, people are motivated to, this is like motivated reasoning, cognitive biases, cognitive errors. People are motivated to accept a rose-tinted view of the facts so that they don't have to accept the uncomfortable truth of what's going on. Because for all of your colleagues, it's like, well, what costs more emotionally for me to step out of the herd and side with one guy who's getting piled on, or to accept this PR, photoshopped version of reality, and I can be part of the majority. I can be comfortable, and if it's just one guy, sorry,
and
buddy.
I think also that what I was pointing out was really inveighing against their ideological predispositions, and if I could show that their ideological predispositions manifested in this way as evil, then in fact they would be very uncomfortable if they accepted my view. So they would, it induced them to accept the administrative view.
Yeah. The thing about it is that you have to be incredibly motivated to see through the lies and want to get at the bottom of the truth. It's so much easier to accept what you're being spoon-fed in the news, in the media, what people, who have a position of power over you, perhaps, or family members. There's pressure that's overt, it's covert, and why make my life miserable, even if there are some people saying that there's something very wrong with the situation. So there's, I think, a level of commitment an individual has, or an innate desire, real desire, to want to get to the bottom of things for themselves, with truth as the highest value.
Or they just have to be like smacked over the head with a catastrophe that, makes it impossible not to see it, right? Where the stakes become personal.
And they need to be willing to engage in a crisis, a kind of crisis of conscience, if such a thing is possible for them.
I wrote about this in Beyond Woke. If you don't mind, I read a little passage.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
I I've learned a lot about shunning over the past 2 years, but I won't say how because I was in the middle of the suit. I couldn't say how. I've learned that shunning is an ancestral behavioral pattern. Directed at the deviant individual, shunning is the means by which the herd ejects the stray and reinforces herd coalescence and mutual self-protection. The herd is the Leviathan and the demos of the decentered cathedral, the papacy with a million popes, as I'll discuss later. For individual herd members, herd compulsion is experienced as a yearning for collective protection and fear of the herd itself. This double compulsion ensures that the compliance is the rule rather than the exception. And it almost all but guarantees that only deviants can see the herd's methods of superintendence, which are therefore incommunicable to herd members. Further, fear of the herd is based on the herd's history of terror, which all cognizant members have witnessed being applied to others, the deviants that everyone must avoid and avoid becoming.
Yep.
So, just getting at the this double compulsion of the herd mentality. It's both you get protection for being in the herd, and you get and then there's the compulsion of fear of the herd itself. And as a member of the herd, you know what the herd can do, and that it has this that it engages in terror. And it destroys people if you don't. So this is all the more incentive not to side with the deviant, not to side with the deviationist. I should put it more likely. Deviance implies some sort of pathology, whereas deviationism is just deviation from the herd mentality or the herd ideology.
Mm-hmm. I did have a little bit of a digression of a question for you, Michael, because some months back we had Rod Dreher on the show. He wrote
like almost a year ago, maybe.
Yeah, it was a while, not too long ago.
More than.
Was it? In any case,
it all blurs together these past couple of years.
He wrote "Live Not by Lies: A Manual for Christian Dissidents," and he had interviewed individuals who lived in the Eastern European Soviet satellite countries in the 50s and 60s, and discussed the types of things that they needed to do for themselves to fortify themselves against tyranny. The networks they created, and the the kind of spiritual, religious organizations and networking that were part of the very substance of their faith in the future and their strength. Yeah. And so I was wondering, because to do what you're doing requires a great deal of strength, I think, personal strength. And so I guess, how do I frame this question? Is there
You just want to spit it right out. I'm fine. I know what you're doing.
Okay. Trying to ease into it a little bit.
No, don't worry about it. Just go for it.
Okay. What, if anything, do you feel is the religious or spiritual dimension to being a kind of a truth warrior in the sphere that you're working? How does that figure in, if at all, to who you are and this work?
Well, you can see that I'm welling up somewhat. I'm a Christian, and that's how it works for me. In other words, I have a conviction to the truth, and I have a faith in my protection, and it also gives me sustenance to continue. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't be able to do it. I don't know if that's too straightforward for what you were getting at, but that's the truth. And now, when I say this, I'm not talking like I shouldn't have to qualify this, but what I mean is that to me, the cross sort of symbolizes everything that is difficult in life, and that the cross to me is the way through. And that redemption comes through that there is this on earth, there is this cross. And this cross, though, is not the end. It leads to another world. And if it weren't for that faith, I don't think I could be able to do this. And I'm not slightly different than Peterson, who sees in Christianity a kind of symbolic archetypes and so forth. I actually believe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so like you're saying, Peterson has recently expressed his own renewal or deeper faith in Christianity or Christ or Jesus, and was also quite emotional. It's a very real thing for him, and it was only through, I think, his trials and challenges that struck to the very core of him that he was able to come to it. Unfortunately, it's sometimes that's what it takes in the life of an individual to know it on some visceral level that isn't necessarily so easy to explain or account for. So I appreciate that. That's something that I wanted to know about you, having read about your years of research and writing about secular organizations.
Yeah, the thing is, interestingly enough, I was attracted, even when I was writing about secularism, to a particular thread of secularism, and the way it was founded, which was that kind of ecumenical movement that also included believers as well as non-believers. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't like a negation. It wasn't about the negation of belief or anything like that. So I trumpeted that sort of as seemingly now, as I see it, an anticipation of where I was headed. Mm-hmm. But I want to say this, connect it back to the book, because I found this to be an important element of the book as well, political ponerology. And that is, Lobachevsky says that this is an empirical fact of human life, that there is a spiritual dimension, and to dismiss it is unscientific. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be very convincing. I've actually I shouldn't say convincing. What it did is it was very, I thought it was, first of all, it's true, I think. And also, secondly, I found it to be a really bold admission on his part to say this, because, it is, when you make confessions like the one I just made, it's an easy way for certain people to dismiss you. Mm-hmm. And generally, everyone, those who are operating from a materialist epistemology and ontology will dismiss you, because they don't, it's much more sophisticated, they think, to have a materialist worldview, and that anything that deviates from that must be some kind of a crank. The person who deviates must be some sort of a crank, where they're looking for a crutch or something like that. I just find it to be an ontological reality. And so I found that very heartening, let's put it that way, to read that in Lobachevsky's discourse, that he said, even to be scientific, we must acknowledge this dimension of human life towards transcendence, and that without the transcendent, nothing really makes sense in terms of human society. You can't even make sense of human society without it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this is put beautifully, I think, in Dreyer's book, in some of the interviews, where it was the believer's faith that allowed them to survive and to live with purpose in such bleak times. And I think it's because the reason for that is not just that they found some self-deception that let them get through something. It's that it worked because it was true.
Yeah.
And there is a power there, and that's something that Lobachevsky acknowledges. He's got a chapter on religion and its relation to pathocracy. And one of the interesting things that he said that stood out to me the first time I read it years ago was that whenever pathocracy develops in a society or in a civilization, it means the religion of that society has failed, and to do its job. And there's the kind of implication of that is that there is an essential place for religion. It fulfills an essential role in human groupings and in societies, and not. I don't even like the way I phrase that because it kind of just sound like a sociologist or something.
It's a you gave us sort of a functionalist tilt, but that's okay.
Yeah. But it is essential. It's because it's an essential part of not only human life but of reality that, and I guess if I could put it if I could try to take the biggest, like broadest view of what Lobachevsky is saying, like throughout this whole book, is that in order for things to work well, in order for a thing to work well, it needs to be consistent and coherent and resonant with all of reality, with like every facet of reality. As soon as you deviate from reality in one of its aspects, then it's like you go off and there's a cliff waiting for every deviation from reality. Whether it's something simple like Mao's Great Leap Forward, and that's not going to work, and a lot of people are going to die, or it could just be something minor like, we'll just ignore or not acknowledge or not see this certain aspect of human nature, and every error that we make snowballs. And totalitarianism is the totalitarianism that we saw in its multiple forms in the 20th century was one of those giant snowballs that turned into a massive avalanche that took tens of millions of people with it.
Yeah. And we saw in the Soviet Union where, atheism became the official state stance, the official state policy and creed, that it didn't destroy religiosity. It only, in fact, it kind of hardened it into place, and such that when the Soviet Union fell, it was a reemergence of it, recrudescence of it, and that it couldn't be squelched because it's necessary, as you put it, because it's necessary not just functionally, because society can't function when it doesn't accord with reality, with the truth. Mm-hmm. And if you get rid of an element like that makes people's lives work, then they won't work when it's gone. And it's distorted. You'll have a distorted worldview that won't allow you to see things as they are. And I think that came home to me very clearly in that book.
Well, I was going to say we might wrap it up in a few minutes. Did you have one last question? I have one more thing to say, but
just a quick comment, and that is that I don't think it's any coincidence that the ease with which people have been allowed to go back to churches, particularly in the U.S. During the past 2 years, the atomization of people being kept apart from the place where they would worship and be with each other in this sharing of worship, couple that with the incredible numbers of churches and religious institutions in Europe getting burned down and vandalized in the past few years, it doesn't seem like very much of an arbitrary thing. It seems on some level part and parcel of this movement towards materialist ideological possession, just kind of extracting any of what's socially helpful and constructive about religious institutions. So just wanted to mention that.
Well, yeah, because
I think that's true, because they need to institute another faith, and they have to get rid of this dominant creed or any creeds that stand in the way.
Yes.
That you took the words right out of my mouth, because that was exactly what I was going to say. If you're looking to create a monopoly, the only way you can do that is destroying your competition. And
Yeah,
if
that's right.
And if
That works in the ideological sphere as well as the economic. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So the church and faith is a direct competitor to or people's conscience. Their direct line to God is a direct competitor with the propaganda line or the propaganda hotline, such as it is like CNN and other outlets, so the media. It's a direct competitor for their ability to control your mind and your thoughts and your emotions and where you put your energy. So it's absolutely no wonder, it's no surprise at all that these kinds of attacks have been happening on these kinds of institutions and believers for that very reason.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, I agree.
Well, I just wanted to reference back a couple shows we did probably in 2020 on a book. I think you might appreciate this book, Michael. Well, I'll give just a tiny little backstory. At this time, I was reading, I think I was reading some of Conceived in Liberty by Murray Rothbard. Mm-hmm. And in that, it's a kind of pre-revolutionary history of America, the United States. And he talks about the Quakers. So there's some really cool stuff about the Quakers in there, and worthy of a show. But at the same time, at around that time, I read a book by a modern Quaker, a guy named Timothy Ashworth, that a bunch of us read. And it's called Paul's Necessary Sin. And it's probably my favorite book on, it's up there among my favorite books on Christianity. And I think his description and his understanding of what the cross means, I think you'll appreciate. And I just wanted to, I can't remember if I'm curbing this from Ashworth, if it's something I thought of myself or if I got it somewhere else, but it's almost like the suffering of the cross, and the suffering in our own lives. It's like that suffering opens up the heart. It opens us to something that maybe before we didn't have access to. It kind of solidifies the connection. And so that's hearing your story, I hear an echo of that because you've suffered a lot over the last over the years, especially these last how many years is it now? 6 years since the whole NYU thing. And I think it's that
Oh, I forgot to mention that while I was being assaulted by the social justice warriors, my son was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at the same time. So, and then my girlfriend at the time became woke and sided with NYU. And so I had, it was a pretty rough time.
Yeah.
But together they constituted my trials and tribulations for sure.
Yeah. Jeez. Well, I think it's a book worth checking out. I think you'll appreciate it.
Paul's necessary sin.
Yeah, it's right away. On first glance, it might appear to be a book on like philology or like what do these words mean? But it all comes together in this like beautiful picture of what he is essentially doing is looking at Paul's letters and trying to find the coherent message within that letters, the coherent message, like view or worldview or just the coherence of the ideas and the images that are in Paul's letters. And it's just, I found it to just beautiful and really well stated.
I'll check it out.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Michael.
Thank you.
Again, this is the latest of Michael's writings available in Political Ponerology. All his books are available on his website, michaelrectenwald.com. We'll have a link in the show description.
Right.
If you're an evil person, you can buy them on Amazon, but if you can buy
them directly from me. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
If you buy them directly from me, I sign them. Yeah.
Great. So michaelrectenwald.com, leave a link. You've also got a news site that you established way back, like 2003, was it? CLG? Maybe 2001.
CLG
right? Okay,
News,
9/11.
yeah, legitgov.org.
Okay,
Yeah.
legitgov.org. So check that out too.
Legitgov.org, that's the news site that I sponsor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but we'll have you on again, especially, well, for sure when your new book comes out, we'll all read it and we'll have you on to talk about it. And maybe we'll have more discussions of this sort in the intervening months. So thank you again.
Hopefully.
Michael, we had a great time talking to you, and we're so glad that you're healthy and that you're writing, and happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's my pleasure.
Take care.